Access, May 10, 2024. Keynote presentation by Dr. Ashley Shew.
I'm super excited to share a little bit about the work that I do, but it's also particularly exciting to do it with this community, the group that you've built through Access and Astro Access. Are really, truly very exciting. And I talk about Astro Access in a number of the presentations that I do to other audiences, but perhaps won't spend as long on that today. I call this presentation Against Technoableism in Space. And I'll start off by saying a white woman in sort of a businessy button down with sort of reddish blonde hair, and my slide says Against Technoableism in Space, and has a cover of my book which has lots of brightly colored wingdings with disability things, and then there's one of the images from my book is actually cut out on the side, and it's a prosthetic foot wearing googly eyes, which is what mine does. Because it stares back. All right. So Cyborg's rules for a disabled talk. Feel free to make your body mind comfortable. Interrupt if we're going too fast. So you have the chat feature, and I hope John or Anna might interrupt me if I am going too fast, or if there's a question in the chat that is relevant to what we're talking about. I know that your eyes are not your attention. Of course, no one else is on camera for this particular event, so that might not matter. And I'll be image describing where I can. And now I ask myself, are the captions working? And it looks like they are. All right, this is going well. All right, the plan for the session, I'll tell you a little bit about me and about ableism and this word that I've coined, technoableism. And I'm going to tell you about how our stories suck. And I'm going to talk about tropes around disability that I really feel really get in the way of doing not just good science, but of being a disabled person in society. And then I'll be talking about Crips in Space and better storytelling. I think so many of the sort of narratives that come out of work like Access and Astro Access are about sort of better ways of thinking about disability, of conceiving about the stories that we tell and how we tell them in important ways. So I'm going to relate it back to storytelling because I am a humanities scholar and not a scientist. But first, I'm going to tell you about myself. Hi, I'm Ashley Shew. I'm multiply disabled. I love the word disabled person because then I don't have to list out everything. So I have chemo brain, I'm hard of hearing, I'm a rotation-plasty amputee. You'll see in the picture to the side of here is a picture of me sitting on a rock, my prosthetic leg next to me, but also my foot is on backwards at knee level, and my ankle serves as my knee. That's a rotation-plasty. I have tinnitus from chemotherapy. I have Crohn's disease, and I'm multiply disabled. And I'm in cross-disability community. Interested in the stories disabled people tell. I noticed in one of the sessions earlier today, someone has already noted that most disabled people are multiply disabled. And I think this is really important because when we think about what research gets done about disability, so many times people select for one disability. They say, oh, we're going to make a disability technology, or we're going to make a disability cure, or we're going to address a particular disability without recognizing that so many of us we come in packages, right? And there are some disabilities that make you more likely to have other disabilities. I think about autistic people who are more likely to have EDS, POTS, or MCAS, right? These disabilities sometimes cluster up, even though not everyone with autism has EDS. This is, not uncommon to have both. And I think about so many of my disabilities are related to cancer treatment. So that's why I have the rotation-plasty. That's why I'm hard of hearing. That's why I have chemo brain and tinnitus. The Crohn's disease is its own thing, and that's okay too. We can have disabilities that aren't necessarily clustered or related as well. But I think it's really important to think about when we want to do disability-forward research, when we want to value disabled people, so much of the way science is oriented in how disabled people are seen as human subjects and as test pilots, it's oriented in only thinking about disabled people as having one disability, and that misses out on the vast majority of disabled people. I'll loop back to that at some point or not. I do have chemo brain, so sometimes things don't loop back. I'm going to share T.L. Lewis's definition of ableism because I think it's a really good one. The concept I have around technoableism is like a particular strain of ableism that I think a lot of people miss in the technology and science space. But ableism more broadly is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systematic oppression that leads to people and society determining people's values based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth or living place, health, wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, or behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. So this is a definition that T.L. Lewis continually updates if it's one that you want to check out for yourself. I really appreciate the work that T.L. Lewis puts into defining ableism, but then also considering feedback and refining it over time instead of saying, here's the definition, I'm going to defend it forever, but to actually add on and consider what ableism, manifests itself as in our society. My larger project in Against Technoableism, this book that came out in September, is about diagnosing the problem of technoableism. And technoableism is a phenomenon where helpers and medical professionals and engineers offer their expertise to help disabled people, where ableism is actually re-emphasized through the technological and medical solutions offered or the approaches on those solutions. This is often wed to the idea that disabled people want this intervention. And I think further will be empowered through technology or this approach with the background assumption, right? If you need this technology in order to be empowered, in order to have a good life, in order to be good, to be a good disabled person, it involves a background assumption that being disabled or having a disabled body mind means you are broken, suboptimal, inferior, or somehow calling out for help or intervention to medical professionals. There are so many stories disabled people tell where medical and technological professionals identify different problems than they care about, right? So you can have, an impairment and not care about it being addressed or have it already addressed in your life. I think about one of my friends with ADHD. I was explaining how it's really hard to show up on time and pick my kids up from school. And I worried all day about missing appointments. So it was really hard to focus on anything as a result of my chemo brain. So I just can't pay attention to the flow of time in the same way. Time doesn't pass like it used to. I don't wake up and know what day it is. And I used to. So I was telling her about this problem. She's like, oh my gosh, people can wake up and know what day it is. And then she showed me what she does so that she makes sure that she knows her appointments. And this is Liz Spinkle. She works in the tech space now. She was a graduate student at the time. She took my phone, opened the alarm function on my phone, and then said, how early do you need to be reminded to get in your car and go get your kids? And then we went 20 minutes back from every pickup time and every drop-off time. And I haven't actually been late to pick up the kids, or worse, forgotten to pick them up since she showed me this simple life hack. It was not a specific disability technology, but I was learning from another disabled person, how to manage my life as a disabled person. She had a much longer experience with this particular type of impairment, maybe, but she had adapted to it. She knew what to do, and she was just sharing that with me. And it didn't require anything special. And it's not like even though I have an impairment, especially around this particular thing, I don't actually experience it as an impairment in the way I used to, because it's been accounted for. So the idea that we're going to come up with particular drug solutions or something like that doesn't necessarily make sense when we can account for things in better ways. So my work focuses on this concept Fiona Kumari Campbell sometimes calls ableism a trajectory of perfection that shapes like systems of value and worth, sort of like the T.L. Lewis definition. And I trace this in looking at technoableism, where narratives about technology and disability written by disabled people very much differ from the sort of media representation that we see around disability, where the power of technology is to redeem, repair, cure, or make disabled people otherwise includable. And this is a term from Tanya Tishkowski. In being perceived as calling out for help, people think about solutions for us where we might not want them or for our management. The AI versions of these things are scary, and there are dangers in being fit for AI or not. I don't say much about that in the book, but this is the sort of next sort of set of writing I've been doing. There are many dangers, actually, in being perceived this way and being misunderstood. We see technoableism reflected in so many histories and media stories that it's hard not to experience this, especially when so many technologies are marketed as being life-changing. So any disability technology that gets made, so much of the splashy university PR is on how great these humanitarian engineers are, and rarely are disabled people actually quoted or acknowledged. They're just the objects to work on. This is just a pattern over and over again. And here is also, I think I'm tracing technoableism. I think it's a phenomenon lots of other people are talking about. And I'm putting a word to things that are going on between conversations between people who are talking about like hearing technologies and people who are talking about drug technologies and people who are talking about like lots of different types of technology. So technoableism sort of like lets us see this sort of narrative picture through lots of different stories about technology and disability. And here we have one of my favorite poets, the cyborg Gillian Weisse, saying something about the impulse towards technoableism, although not with those words. They write, "They like us best with bionic arms and legs. They like us deaf with hearing aids, though they prefer cochlear implants. It would be an affront to ask the hearing to learn sign language. Instead, they wish for us to lose our language, abandon our culture, and consider ourselves cured. They like exoskeletons, which none of us use. They would never consider cyborg those of us with pacemakers or on dialysis, those of us kept alive by machines or made ambulatory by wheelchairs, those of us on biologics or antidepressants. They want us shiny and metallic and in their image." So the stories we currently have suck. There's no better way to put it. I don't think I want to be more polite on this topic. Stories about disability, especially when told by non-disabled people or when disabled bodies, minds are used as metaphors, get a lot wrong and leave a lot out. You will be familiar with some of these stories. Helen Keller, who has a film about her life called The Miracle Worker, is not the miracle worker in her own story. The literal name of her biography praises someone else for like changing and shaping her life with the addition of signed language by putting that sort of literally in her hands. We miss out on a larger story. Usually, I mean, Helen Keller is usually the first disabled person who's a focal object, say in elementary school. And you don't hear about Helen's progressive politics. You don't hear about the rest of her life. You hear about her as a child who needed help and intervention. And we're told about, the people who came to her rescue, right? Even though she is a woman who, graduated from Radcliffe, she was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. She corresponded in Braille in multiple languages. We don't actually get to hear that part of the story usually. So the first thing we're even confronted with in terms of disability, even at a young age, is this sort of techno-ableist story. The ableist, certainly. And if we take the technology as Braille or sign language, then this gets a certain cachet. FDR, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his image was used to shame other post-polio survivals into working harder in rehab, even though the image of him as someone who stands up. It was largely a ruse. He was carried up and down stairs by Secret Service people to give different talks. But the sort of image of him in a wheelchair only came much later in his presidency, after he was, deemed like recovered, overcoming his disability enough to be president, right? But it's a ruse. He's used as a weapon against other disabled people when post-polio survivors are confronted with, well, why aren't you like him? Are you not working hard enough to be rehabilitated? And then we have stories like Harriet Tubman, who never gets credited as being disabled, but she had lifelong sleeping spells from a violent blow to the head as a teenager. This is not irrelevant, and it makes her more of a badass, not less. But so often we don't mention disability, especially those that are acquired, say, by the cruelties of chattel slavery, right? She was hit in the head by someone on a horse when she tried to like intervene between her and another Black person who he was trying to hit, trying to capture and bring back into slavery. So we have these stories. There are also ways in which so many of our stories even now suck. So I've given you some historical reference where we're not telling the whole story about disability, where the images of disabled people are used to say something about what it is disabled people need to do to be good, right? To take the help or to overcome or to play down certain aspects if it makes sort of particular types of bigotry changed. I don't know how to put that. All right. And yes, even now our stories suck. So I've given you some like examples here, but there are so many novels and films that snuff out the disabled character by the end, discarded after they've done their job of inspiration or villainy or showing how good, usually, the protagonist is to, say, interact with a disabled person. News stories breathlessly tell me that every disability technology is going to be life-changing, but most of those things fail commercially or socially. We ask non-disabled people to speak over disabled people at every step in this too. Non-disabled people are often deferred to, quoted, and celebrated in the context of disability technologies. Disabled people get to be test pilots, get to be human subjects, but we celebrate sort of the engineers, the people with the patents make the money, even though so many times the people with the ideas are actually disabled people, exchanging things with each other or working sometimes with engineering teams in ways that don't compensate or credit them properly. So many times disabled stories are about evidencing the good of other people and not about like having a good disabled life. Okay. So we see in these representations of disability, this disability cast as broken as her aberration. It tells us something's wrong. It warrants your scrutiny, dismissal, intervention, commentary. I often talk about these 5 tropes around disability, and I meant to have a slide that says the 5 tropes, and I don't think I do. I'm so sorry. Here are the 5 tropes, and I'm going to tell you. The first is pitiable freaks. And I've represented that on this slide with 2 images. So in the left-hand corner, there's a young man in a white suit holding the hand of a young woman in a power share, and it says he asked her to prom even in her condition, like and share equals respect. Right. So the idea is, and especially you see this during prom season in the United States, where people make the news for asking a disabled person to prom, a pity date. People look back on some of these moments in their life and cringe, right? If you're the disabled person who is making the news as a side object, usually not interviewed. But even if you were, like, what are you going to say? You're going to look ungrateful and seem bitter if you say the wrong thing here. And also be like, well, why don't you accept help and let people be nice to you? So this idea that disabled people like exist as sort of either freaks to be included and evidence people's good, or to be pitiable. So here we have next to that the I Am Autism commercial by Autism Speaks. It has this spooky voiceover, and this was taken off the air after a whole bunch of outcry by autistic adults. It has the spooky voiceover, and by the way, Autism Speaks is a hate group because they want to eliminate people with autism. Right, that's okay. It has the spooky voiceover that goes, I am autism. It has like a swinging without a child in it, and like creakiness. And it says, I will steal your children away. I will make sure your marriage ends up in divorce. I claim more lives than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined, as if those are relevant categories of comparison. It waxes on about how you'll never be able to like eat in a restaurant comfortably again. And like the end is like, oh, and we say no to autism, but it personifies disability, to add to sort of the pity you should feel for families of autistic people, to sort of stir up your contributions and your charity. But in doing so, it stigmatizes autism further, and it makes autistic people, like, their reception in the world is demonstrably worse when people's knowledge of autism comes from a commercial like this. The next is moochers and fakers. And here I have a image of the snarky Wonka meme. And it says, bless your heart trying to get disability benefits. I don't think lazy is the disability. I think about all the ways in which disabled people are discouraged from accessing needed accommodations and necessary accessibility measures in their lives because they will be scrutinized by other people. So many times the conversation about benefits is around people faking or not really like needing what they're being given. It's really hard, to get on disability payments or benefits because they scrutinize you so much. B, if we have things like parking placards, I mean, I have friends that won't use their parking placards even though they've run out of breath or they have trouble with their spine or back because they don't look disabled. So people will yell at them in parking lots, and it's not worth it to them. And they would rather, be injured and going out than be injured by people trying to attack them. And this actually has a huge chilling effect on sort of claiming disability identity and being included. The next is sort of villainy. So this bitter cripples trope. Next to this, we have a picture of Gary Sinise playing Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. And he is a double amputee, although he is not really in real life. But so many of our villains, and here I think also of Captain Hook, right? People who are villains because they are disabled or their disability, like, gives you a clue into the fact that they're going to be a villain. We have Black Panther with Claw, right? Another, like, if it's an arm amputee, it's definitely a villain, just given the history of film. So Claw and Captain Hook being two large examples of that. People will come back with Star Wars and the Luke hand, but I don't know that counts just because the sort of seamless transition into the technology, people do adapt. Yeah, so, and anyone with a facial scar or physical deformity, sort of classic theater, indicates this is going to be a villain. So this sort of bitter cripple idea also means that people sometimes are denied what they actually need because, oh, you're just complaining. You're not real about that. The next below that is, I forgot this guy's name. He's holding up a box of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes with marshmallows, which I think was superimposed on the box. And it says new Frosted Flakes with marshmallows, free diabetes in every box, right? This is blaming people for having diabetes based on, sugary foods, which actually is not how you get diabetes. But a lot of these tropes occur around diabetes, occur around lung cancer, where lung cancer patients are treated much worse than other types of cancer patients, just because the idea that they have somehow earned or deserved the cancer that they have is really awful. But also, like, if you tell someone you have lung cancer, usually their first question is if you've ever smoked. And it's not that smoking doesn't lead to lung cancer. It's that no one deserves lung cancer and you shouldn't treat people terribly. Right. And we also see this trope around sort of shameful sinners, right? That you caused your own disability or that you deserve it, sort of in a lot of rhetoric around HIV and AIDS through the 1980s and 90s, and occasionally still today, where people talk about it as a lifestyle disease and justify horrible treatment of AIDS patients, because they view it as something like God ordained to punish you, right? So that's shameful sinners. And then the last one, and this one you may be more familiar with. This is something that Stella Young talks about as inspiration porn in a really famous TED Talk. this image with the words, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude" by a non-disabled person, Scott Hamilton. And this image did not age well because this is a young girl on running blades next to a man on running blades, and they're running together. But if you like zoom in and you look real close to your screen, the bib says Oscar Pistorius, and now we know him as a murderer rather than as an inspirational figure. So this particular image still gets passed around is sort of beyond ridiculous, right? But it has to do with disabled people, it seems better, right, to be inspirational after you've seen these other tropes in action. But so many times people are made into like objects and I think about this like with FDR as well, objects to shame other disabled people for not performing their disabilities correctly and to tell us how to be good disabled people, which is always like existing for other people, which is something a lot of research around disability asks us to be too. So what I'm telling you is that all these common stories suck for disabled people, and they suck for disabled people in different ways. All of them find their way into how we talk about disabled scientists and engineers who are sometimes like abnormalized for the disabilities that they have, and how we talk about disability technologies. They enter into how we value and devalue other people. So in the context of disability technologies, so I end up talking about these tropes in the book quite a bit. I'm sort of diverging at some point in this talk from anything in the book, but sort of related to this concept of technoableism. So in the context of disability technologies, these tropes tell us different things. If you're working with a trope of pitiable freaks, you think that disabled people should feel lucky to be the objects of your research, right? And if people express dissent about that, you might classify them as a bitter cripple who's not worth including. If you are using a moochers and fakers trope, and of course, some types of disabled people get labeled these in different ways. And also your positionality like matters socially. So I think about a poem called The Magic Wand by Lynn Manning, where he talks about, when people gaze upon him, they think he's going to be really good at basketball, and they have like all of these sort of terrible biases about tall Black men that get played out on him. But then he whips out his white cane because he's a blind Black man. And he whips out his white cane, and it just transforms all the narratives around him, where people now think he's pitiful instead of scary, where people think he's going to be really great at playing the piano instead of really good at playing basketball, and these sort of things. And the magic wand is, he says, "I wield the wand, but you all are the magicians," right? So these ways in which bodies get read, race plays a role in them, social position, what you're wearing, how you're standing, all of these things can play into how you're read through these tropes. But often you fall into one of them in the way a lot of social narratives fall, the way a lot of entertainment media and news media work out around disabled people. So pitiable freaks, moochers and fakers, disabled people are denied technologies and supports they need, or disbelieved when they're asking for a particular technology. I think about the number of people who are denied the use of wheelchairs or discouraged by their physicians or not allowed to get a prescription because, oh, you're young, you should be able to walk. Even though wheelchairs are just a tool that can be useful. And you don't have to be paraplegic or quadriplegic to have the benefits of a wheelchair, especially if it means that you can conserve your energy to do more things each day. I think about bitter crippers where disabled people are failing to make the best of their situations. Like that's read onto them. And therefore we can ignore what they say about technology when they complain about the situation or complain about always being perceived in a particular way. They can be dismissed. I think about shameful sinners where disabled people are told that we should be praying for mercy in the form of research to cure or normalize, right? So many people when they become disabled, friends and family want to tell them about exciting research that could cure them or that could fix them. And so many times the research is really far away if that ever happens. And also like spending all your time hoping for a future that may never exist is not actually a great way to live. It's not that people shouldn't have hope, but it can prevent you from adjusting to your circumstances if you're always inundated with something miraculous is about to happen. And then, of course, this inspirational overcomers, technology is supposed to enable us to overcome our bodies and minds, and we're supposed to celebrate it in that context. And we're not playing our role correctly as disabled people if we're not enthusiastic about the technology to help us overcome in particular ways. We're asked to be the spokespeople for technology so often. And when you speak against that that script, right? You get labeled bitter pretty quickly. So I think about in my research what it means to actually value disability. And this is one of the things that I really love in the way Mission Astro Access works. And I use the hashtag Crips in Space. This is something that predates Astro Access and Sci Access. There was this wonderful issue of the Deaf Poets Society that asked for contributions, artistic contributions, poetry, about space and disability. And it was incredibly generative and beautiful to see disabled people imagining what it would be like if they were allowed into space programs, or how not being allowed to think about space and dream about space in the way other children did, was significantly different, right? Disabled children weren't given the same ability to dream about space in many contexts. So there's a history here. I think about, and many of you will be familiar with the Gallaudet 11 congenitally deaf men recruited from Gallaudet University in the 1960s, who were put through all the same training and testing as astronauts were. And they were never considered candidates for the astronaut program, even though they went through all the same training. But NASA was really interested in studying them because they didn't get motion sick. They were actually superior, say, for space flight because they didn't get motion sick. And they were studied like, how can we learn how to, reduce motion sickness as a large concern in some of these things. Yeah, there's a history also of thinking about biology in space, and we can think about how bodies are perceived differently, even between conversations like happening in the United States space programs and in the USSR at the time, and thinking about like where women fit in a space program, right? The USSR allowed women in their space program and didn't think of them as automatically disabled or kept out, right? If we're talking about, I'm going back to T.L. Lewis's definition of ableism. You don't have to be disabled to experience ableism, right? And the idea was that women weren't suitable for space travel in ways that align pretty well with sort of ableist rhetoric around bodies here. There was great conversation around Stephen Hawking's zero-G flight in 2007. And in 2017, of course, we got the Deaf Poets Society issue, where it was edited by Alice Wong of the Disability Visibility Project and a million other projects in disability community writing, and Sam DeLeve. And Sam DeLeve had this wonderful visual film on YouTube about recruiting us to write for Crips in Space, where they show themselves moving around their kitchen by pushing off of different objects. And sort of the visual argument was that disabled people in many contexts are more suitable in space because we're already learning to navigate the world differently than most people. Right, the environment we're in is already hostile in particular ways, and we've had to find workarounds in terms of movement. So when we think about how wheelchair users might navigate their kitchen and pushing off of spaces, that actually looks a lot like how, now that we've seen the images from Astro Access, but about how people, were moving in lower gravity. In fact, a lot of wheelchair users who have a lot of upper body movement would feel more akin to how people are orienting their bodies because of these experiences. You also have wonderful writing about what it would feel like to have lower gravity. So we have Marlena Shartak, who wrote a whole book of poetry about going on a one-way trip to Mars. It's a fantastic book of poetry, but about how, as someone with osteogenesis imperfecta, the weight of gravity on her bones has compressed her skeleton, what it would mean to feel free in this space. So thinking creatively. I think here also, I think it was 2018 or 2019, Sherry Wells Jensen published this case for blind astronauts that so many people reference. And there were sort of events at the Library of Congress on becoming interplanetary and decolonizing Mars that had to do with thinking through lots of different types of difference and social positioning around thinking about who has the right stuff or who gets to be thought of as a potential candidate for so many things. And here's where I love Astro Access coming in. So much of what they write about how disabled people are a resource for creativity, for planning, for understanding in ways that improve life for everyone. So here they write, accessibility spurs innovation that benefits all users. Flight safety is always a paramount concern in spaceflight, and many current warning systems implement certain sensory signals for the notifications and remediation of anomalies. However, safety systems directly reflect the design criteria. When criteria are rethought to include a wider range of people and capabilities, these systems can be made safer overall. So the thought is about designing environments, systems, and technologies for the broadest sets of users. This is great for emergency planning, but if we're setting things up in this way, if we let disabled people lead in these spaces and provide, disabled people have wonderful perspectives on how things could be different because so many of us are having to use infrastructure differently already. And sort of the creativity that comes from that. So there have been so many wonderful conversations that I've had with other disabled people over the years. One of my favorite is with Mallory K. Nelson, who's an artist and costume designer by trade. I met her through amputee stuff because we're both amputees. I feel like she's one of my amputee mentors in welcoming me into community in so many ways. Talks about we were having a conversation about space, and she said, all astronauts should really have ostomy bags. So I had been telling her about how hard it is to poop in space. I had been to the Kennedy Space Center and seen the space toilet exhibit and had read a lot about pooping in space and toilet design because, a girl's got to have interests. And she was saying, oh, what would be better if everyone had ostomies, then you wouldn't have to do all of this silly engineering. In fact, this is a much better system and nothing, is going to get out because I know how to work this. And sort of, I had told her about one of the disasters with one of the shuttles where the first time that they used the toilet was fine. And the second time they used the toilet, like little droplets of excrement went everywhere, and then it was a problem. Okay, so the sort of like complications, and she was like, oh, they could solve that all by recruiting only people who have ostomy bags, so people with Crohn's disease and with bowel cancers, and people who had experienced things that made an ostomy a choice that was good for their body. Or a necessity, I guess, not always a choice. These sorts of things actually really matter. So many times when you're in conversation with other disabled people, you're finding out, how they've thought about how their bodies would work in different spaces, because we're always thinking about how our bodies will work in different spaces. That's a regular part of our days. So there are all these sort of benefits to disability forward planning, but like things that really suggest that disabled people's exclusion from the space program, which I know there are some changes, but not nearly enough or quickly enough and kind of done in a weird selection way. We need to take with us the observation also that space will make us disabled if we go there for any length of time. People come back from the International Space Station and other longer term missions with changes to their vision. Their eyeballs change shape a little bit. They experience osteoporosis, and there are other situations that we can expect to see in space. The sort of twin study with the Kelly brothers has been like a demonstration of how it is to come back down and the sort of long-term implications of being in space for so long. And in that sense, it's really ridiculous to recruit non-disabled people when going to space because space is going to make us disabled. Disability is already a resource in our planning. And in fact, we're all disabled in space because it's not our environmental niche, right? I think about the ways in which so much of what it means to be disabled is to be misfit with the environment that you're given. And in this case, no one is fit for space, right? We have to do so much engineering to go there because that is not our sort of ecological niche, right? That's not, it's a hostile environment in ways that are like, it's hard to even list the number of ways in which it's a hostile environment. In fact, disabled people are used to encountering environments that also are not supportive of their bodies and learning to work around. So we should be planning at every step for disabled space futures. And that's one of the reasons I really love Astro Access, but there's a medical context to this as well. When we start thinking about disabled bodies as a resource for creativity, when we talk about when we talk about valuing disabled people in our voices and our opinions, and sort of considering what disabled people have to say about these particular environments and what it would mean, we can start rethinking the ways in which bodies are esteemed as good bodies for space or not. Right? We don't have to stick to earthly norms. When I think about the Galet at 11, they were better, demonstrably better at not getting motion sick, a superior physiology, but would have never been considered. By framing disabled bodies as necessarily risky, it just won't hold in the same way in space contexts as it might on Earth, but a lot of that's social mechanisms as well. And so much of the framing of our bodies as being problematic justifies second-class treatment on Earth, right? That we're always an afterthought, a retrofit, a need for accommodations. So when we think about like what it would mean to build worlds that are habitable by a wide variety of disabled people, we can put that understanding back into earthly contexts. We need to plan for disabled people in medicine that is more robust than our current retrofitted ideas. I really love work by Lisa Ayazeni, where she's shown that 40% of US physicians are uncomfortable with treating disabled people, full stop. But there are many of us, and our ranks are growing, especially in the wake of COVID-19, and they will grow, especially in the context of climate change and natural disaster and new viruses that will pop up along the way. Our future is disabled whether we go to space or not. So yes, our bodies will be disabled if we go to space, but also we will have more disabled people here on Earth in the future because climate change, the way in which things are on trajectory already, means that we have, say, ticks existing through the winter in a wider range of spaces, and more people with Lyme disease, right? That's a change in the number of disabled people. We have more people due to environmental pollution and environmental racism with asthma and other breathing conditions. And there are some things that we don't even understand in terms of like the uptick in different types of allergies and things that exist. So whether we're on planet or off planet, our future is disabled. And disabled people should therefore be included not just as regular participants, but as valued members who have wisdom to offer in terms of planning for the future. I really love this quote from Harriet McBride Johnson's Accidents of Nature, and then I'll end. Can a wheelchair be a choice and not a failure? Surely for most people, it makes sense to try to become as normal as possible. But what if normal isn't the only way to be? Here, we have two characters who were in a conversation, and at the end, the main character of this book is reflecting on this conversation. And the other girl that she was talking about was happy that she had never had to go through the same amount of physical therapy or be forced to walk because she was more disabled and they never bothered. And our two wheelchair using girls in this scenario. And she was thinking, well, what she'd always felt that because she didn't walk, because they had tried to make her walk, she walked briefly and then had to use the wheelchair again, that this was a failure in her life. But what if we had technological choices that allowed disabled people to value different modalities and think about how to bend the world on Earth and in space towards comfortable being in the world for everyone? All right. So my book is about the stories disabled people tell that non-disabled people usually aren't interested in. I want to take seriously the experiences of disabled people in a world that often considers technology the solution to the problem, and they consider it a problem of disability. But being disabled by itself is not a problem, except that everyone around you thinks it is, and that's a problem. All right, I have a cute little drawing where I've drawn a prosthetic leg with a socket, and I say, "Sock it to me." I'm ready for questions. All right, I'm gonna stop screen share so I can see more things other than just my face. Okay.
Ashley, thank you so much for that fantastic talk. That was incredible. And I'm sure we will have many questions. I know I just learned so much, and I'm so excited to have you here today. We have our first question from Axel, who says, "Dear Ashley, My mind is blown. I'm sure that's a sentiment shared by many. Next year, I'm starting my PhD thesis on adaptive spaceflight, enhancing accessibility and procedures for astronauts with impaired abilities. In order to find fundings, most people are pushing me towards engineering a prosthesis. I miss a hand from birth. That would make me, quote, more able in order to get money from the prosthesis industry. I do not want to do that because if I succeed, it would make me the only one in my thesis would help. I want to work on how to adapt procedures to make sure more people can complete the tasks astronauts do and dream about. Do you have any advice on how I should go about avoiding technoableism, or maybe orient me towards other people that could guide me?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a larger conversation with you. I've been in conversation with space anthropologist Justin Walsh, who I know is on Astro Access's board now, and two engineers. We've been sitting down every week just to talk about projects we could work on, because I'm not like anti-prosthesis. So much of prosthetic technology serves only one person. And I love my prosthesis. I'm glad it serves me, not hating it. But we also have to think about the surfaces we exist in ends up being really important if you're a leg amputee. I'm a leg I did show you the picture. I'm a leg amputee. You can't tell when I'm waving my arms around. But I would love to get in contact with you if you would want to be part of some of those conversations, because so much of our conversation has been about well, if we were to work together, would we want to make something that fits on a person or that fits on a wall that the person can be fitted to? What would that look like? And I know Astro Access has some thoughts along those lines too. And there's also the European Space Agency, and they're testing with John McFall, who is a below knee amputee. But I feel like they chose the easiest potential case for inclusion, because if walking doesn't matter and you're a below knee amputee, what's the problem with going to space? Yeah. And what they're doing right now is they are finding out if his prosthesis is going to emit gas, that would be poisonous if you're in an enclosed space. And but why would he even need to wear it? I have so many questions. But if you want to have a very specific amputee conversation, I should probably answer other people's questions, because I want to say a lot about this, but also I'll bore the pants off of everyone.
Thank you, Ashley. And Axel, feel free to share your contact information and we can put you in touch. Thank you. Next question I have here is, are there any resources that you would recommend for people looking for more disability community connections?
Yes, I love Alice Wong's Disability Visibility Project and all of her social media accounts. She's on all the platforms. She really is our cyborg queen. She has the edited volume, Disability Visibility, which is just stories from other disabled people. I think there are some really good specific disability orgs out there for specific types of disability. But as a multiply disabled person, I find what Disability Visibility and relatedly the Crip the Vote campaign that Disability Visibility was connected into to be really, really exciting. They don't have a national conference or anything, so a lot of times you have to look at individual types of disability. I was recently the only amputee at an event for paralyzed people. So you can drop in on other people's events too. I don't think people could figure out whether I was a vendor trying to sell them something, which is the other contingent of people there, or whether I belonged with them. It was a nightmare for me personally. But I did enjoy the event and learned a lot. Yeah, in terms of cross disability events, there's the Nickel Conference in DC, if you're thinking nationally, but in terms of international work, Disability Visibility, even though it's located in the US, brings into conversation sort of a really wide range of disability types and a wide variety of disabled people. They're my favorite.
Thank you. Rick asks about your book Against Technoableism and whether or not it's available in Braille.
I know that there is an audio version. I don't think the Braille has been created. So the book just came out. Oh God, it's in September. Hey, and the audio version came out later. If you're interested in a Braille version, I have a friend who's a Brailer, and I might be able to work that out on a limited case basis. But there isn't a Braille version that's been for sale yet. But they got the audio version out in December. So there's like it's going. And part of that was I was super choosy about who I wanted to be my voice. So I held up the audiobook till December because I wanted a particular disabled woman to voice me instead of the non-disabled NPR-ish voice that they gave me.
Thank you. The next question I have is, how have your editorial experiences impacted your views and perspectives in the technology and disability studies field? And or what are other upcoming trends that interest and excite you?
Oh, someone's putting in the chat information about Braille printing and about Bookshare, and can be accessed through Braille display on Bookshare. Thank you, Sarah Coleman, for that. Oh, and Lizette Torres Gerald wrote that Disability Intersectionality Summit by Sandy Ho is another good one to go to. Yes, I would agree to that. Love that. Yeah. So you asked the question, and can you say which question am I on now, Anna?
No worries. I'm also just looking at the messages in the chat here as well to make sure that they're available to everyone. I see Caroline also shared that the Clovernook Braille Center in Cincinnati can also help with Braille production for books on request. So a lot of great answers here from the community. Thank you, everyone. Just resharing some of those. Yes, Ashley, so the question I had was, how has your writing and editorial experiences impacted your views and perspectives in the technology and disability studies field? And what are some upcoming trends that interest or excite you in this area?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what I'm reading is disability community writing, sometimes like against what's being written about us in other spaces, and sometimes just as a matter of like memoir or poetry and people's reflection on these things. I've been paying a lot of attention lately to to two sets of things. One is conversations around alternative and augmentative communication technologies. I really appreciate a lot of the conversation coming out of communication first, and to think about, as someone who's trained in philosophy, I think a lot about like the difference between instrumental goods and intrinsic goods. And I think so much of the way we talk about walking and talking, oh, everyone should want to walk, everyone should want to talk, that these are really important things, but they're only like good for what they get you. Like there's not like, walking's great because you can go places, but there are other ways to go places. So it's just an instrumental good. It gets you somewhere else, but you can get there through other means. And the same with talking. Communication is possible. And I think being demonstrated more and more, the sort of technologies we have for AAC and the sort of communication like around those technology by in-group members. So people who are non-speaking or partially non-speaking, the community there where they're talking about what works and what doesn't, and they like working out what sorts of AAC might work for particular people. I really enjoy sort of paying attention to what's going on in so many of those groups, even though I'm always thinking about sort of like, how is this related to conversations that are happening elsewhere? And I would love for us to have that conversation more around walking as well. I mean, personally as an amputee, but also I really appreciate Bill Peace's writing about how walking for many people, and these are his words, is a shitty subpar option. Right. And he wrote under the name the Bad Cripple. Right. So he's revealing particular truths. And it's not good for everyone. And so I've been thinking a lot about those two conversations. The other area that I've been thinking a lot about is AI, because how when people want to develop a technology and they want to seem like they're good people, they say, well, I can find a use for disabled people, so I'm doing humanitarian work, even though what they're really interested in is like surveilling people and selling their technology to the Department of Defense. You know that? I'm really worried about how different groups are describing AI and their potential uses on and about disabled people in ways that disabled people probably won't benefit from and will materially be harmed by. I think about some of the conversations that have happened around sort of even data recording around electronic visit verification for people who use personal attendant services through Medicaid, and how they're like more deeply surveilled. I think about prosthetic leg users who have computerized knees that count all their steps. And if they walk too much, then maybe they don't need that technology. And if they walk too little, then they don't deserve that technology. I think there's a lot of ways in which the moochers and fakers trope, once we are surveilled more heavily, will be really harmful, especially because most people, like, our disabilities vary. This is the idea of dynamic disability. Some days I can do things, and other days I might not be able to do those things. And that isn't something non-disabled people seem to know, but a lot of our systems of control around benefits and accommodations seem to rely on the idea that disability is static when it absolutely is not.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Lindsay. Lindsay, I've just gone on and I've given you mic access, so you should be now able to unmute and ask your question. Lindsay, it looks like you might still be muted, but if you're having any difficulties with that, feel free to type the question in the chat and we'll make sure that that answer gets back to you. And we can also come back to you in a minute here if you still have a question. Ashley, the next question I have here is, can you please repeat the name and author for the poetry you mentioned about Mars?
Oh, I'll get the book. Oh, there it is. It's called On That One-Way Trip to Mars by Marlena Shertak. And one of the poems, I actually think 2 to 3 of the poems, are shared on the Deaf Poets Society Crips in Space issue. But I wanted to include one of the poems in this presentation today, but I like all of them. And I decided not to make this a poetry reading. So yeah, you got to check it out. It's great.
Thank you. We have a question here from Luke, who is talking about how language is ever evolving. And I thought some of the terminology used in your talk may have been falling out due to its use by the abled community as a way to put down or avoid triggers caused by discriminations. And it seems like some of this language has been reclaimed to a degree. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah. So especially when I'm talking about something like Crips in Space, like that is like proper nouns, right? This is the hashtag they made. There's no way to avoid it. And things like the concept of Crip time and Crip space times. That's the Crip space times is a new book out by Margaret Price. Those are also like, you know, these are terms, and not necessarily like about a particular person's body. Crip, of course, is a derivative of the word cripple, and a lot of people are working on like reclaiming it or using it for themselves. It's kind of like 20 years behind queer. In terms of like how queer used to be an insult, and now people are like, we got to put the Q in LGBTQIAA, right? That you don't necessarily have to pick between the other letters, that you could just call yourself queer and simplify your life, right? I enjoy, and I know there's been some conversation around CRIP, where people with cognitive disabilities or with learning disabilities might not relate to it, because we think of cripple now so much as like around like broken bodies, broken legs, that kind of thing. But there's like a long history of people with mental health, intellectual, and developmental disability being called mental cripples. So it applies to all of us. So you too can reclaim CRIP if you want to, but that is your choice. I like the word CRIP, but I also recognize that if you're in the community, it's a term you can probably use, and if you're not in the community, you can say CRIP time, right? Because that's a proper noun situation. It's a theory has that, but you probably shouldn't call people Crips if you're not one. Yeah, and I think that like that follows sort of the history of the word queer in some ways too. Now more people can say it than could even 10 years ago, unless if they were trying to be insulting, right? So I think we'll see that change in the future. And also like the Crip Hop Nation with a K is an artistic movement that started like 20 years ago. Like there's a longer history to this word. 20 years ago, what year is it? It's like the late 90s, 25 Almost 30 years ago. Okay. Time, I don't understand it. So many ways.
Sci Access. Learn more at www.sciaccess.org.